Join me today as we talk a little bit about when fiction kind of grows beyond its bounds. I called the other video when when reality and fiction collide, part 1, because as I was editing it, I realized I had a little bit more to say on the topic. So here we are on part 2, where we're going to talk a little bit about Marvel Comics and specifically the X-Men. This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bobbie, and today we're going to be talking about when fiction grows beyond its bounds, when reality and fiction collide, essentially. Because it has more to do with, like, when you try to introduce real-world concepts into fictional settings that just aren't built for them. And today we're going to be talking about the X-Men. Did another video on this where I mainly talked about Star Wars after some things that happened in Andor Season 2's opening. And as I was editing it, I realized, there's probably a lot more to say on this topic. So called the video part 1, and well, here's part 2. Maybe there'll be a part 3, I don't know. See where we go. So, I did kind of briefly talk about how comics do also have the problem I described in the last episode, where you have moments where the creatives decide, hey, let's address this real world topic that's kind of related to what we're doing in the comics, and they just don't put a lot of thought into it. They think they're being, societally aware, edgy, who knows, trying to use their platform to spread awareness for something, and hey, I understand. But the presentation a lot of times just doesn't work, because you're trying to inject some real world event or idea or, thinly veiled euphemism into a setting that does not operate on the rules of the real world, and it starts to not work. And Marvel Comics actually has a very long-running example of this, where some of the core themes of the book that have existed almost since the beginning, just to a lot of people, don't seem to work with the rest of the Marvel Universe. Now, I don't particularly believe that myself, but a lot of people do have this belief. Because I do see that a lot of people talk about that the X-Men should just be its own separate universe, that it just doesn't make sense in the greater context. And there are things that do make one wonder. And I don't know if the problem is the X-Men, or if the problem is the rest of Marvel just not trying to go along with the X-Men. And so, what do I mean here? Well, there's some big differences between the X-Men and the rest of Marvel. For instance, a number of the X-Men villains are trying to kill them. That is actually kind of different from the rest of the Marvel Universe. Believe it or not, in the average confrontation that Spider-Man has with most of his villains, they're not trying to kill him. Now, maybe as a secondary, hey, he's in my way, and if I kill him, this will all be a lot easier kind of way, sure. But generally speaking, Dr. Octopus doesn't lay some elaborate plan to try to kill Spider-Man. It's more like, oh, he's in my way. He's been in my way before. He might be in my way in the future. I should kill him now just to get him out of the way. Or the Vulture, or any number of other villains. There's exceptions, obviously, like Carnage, but Carnage is a psychopath who tries to kill all kinds of people. Or the Green Goblin, but that's because, it's the Green Goblin, who is also a psychopath. And I'm sure there's other exceptions. I'm not super well versed in all Spider-Man's villains, so I couldn't say in every single encounter, for instance, with, say, the Hobgoblin, that the Hobgoblin didn't lay some trap to try to kill Spider-Man at some point, or that Mysterio didn't, or something. But by and large, it's like the Green Goblin. Because, as I've heard it expressed before, Norman Osborn is Peter Parker's archenemy. Dr. Octopus is probably Spider-Man's archenemy. And so it's more personal. Plus, again, Norman Osborn is a psychopath. So, murdering someone kind of right up there with just ways to eliminate problems. So, and again, it's not a matter of his villains aren't willing to kill, for the most part. Like, several of them are. But it's a matter of, like, that's not the goal. The goal is usually some heist. Now, take a look at the X-Men. The Sentinels, they exist to capture and or kill mutants. And governments all over the planet have them. Half the time when they're fighting Apocalypse, he's probably trying to kill them. Mr. Sinister, a little less so. Magneto usually is a practical matter of he knows Xavier is going to get in his way, along with the X-Men. So he might preemptively try to make a move. People like Cameron Hodge just hate all mutants, so of course they want to kill them. Stryker want to try to kill them all. And just, you've got just several of their villains just want to kill them. And it's not even a matter of like with Spider-Man and like with Peter Parker and Harry and Norman Osborn. It's a matter of, Norman Osborn hates him, and it's built up over decades of conflicts. And, with the other, like, it's specific. He hates Peter Parker. The others, they hate them because they're mutants. Most of them, it's not a matter of, it's the X-Men. It's those damn dirty muties. We got to kill them all kind of attitude. And that's not a common attitude in Marvel as far as between heroes and villains. So you have that, but then you also just have the larger, like, the fact so many people are prejudiced against them. And to a lot of people, that doesn't make any sense. Now, I'm going to try to explain it, because there is a logic behind it, as much as there can be behind things like that. When people are like, oh man, those mutants, like, they're a menace, they're a threat. Well, for one thing, depending on the exact moment we're talking, there's probably millions of them. Okay, now you gotta understand, most mutants do not have fantastic powers. Most of them are like Lobster Hands guy, or the guy in the cartoon that I used to refer to as like too much hair guy. People that just have some genetic abnormality. Most of them do not fire laser beams out of their eyes. Most of them cannot suck the life force out of people, or charge objects, or have cool metal claws, or anything. And the metal part's not actually part of his mutation, but you know what I mean. Can't read minds. Most of them, their powers are probably not even going to help them in a fight. They'll probably not even give them the slightest of edges. Most of them, some of them could even be a hindrance. So, most mutants are not a threat. The problem is the ones that are one hell of a threat. Like, on the one hand, you have Lobster Hands guy. On the other hand, you have Magneto, who can shut down the planet. Like, that's a hell of a power to have. And on top of that, unlike other villains, like, there are mutants who are mutant supremacists who want to just wipe out the human race, the flat scans. And that's because when there's scan, it doesn't register anything, it's flat, instead of detecting the X factor gene. That's why they call them flat scans. So, you have these villains who, like, very loudly proclaim, like, we've come here to kill all of you. Like, you're all, just normal humans, screw you guys. It's the mutants world now. Like, Iron Man doesn't have to deal with that. Like, the Mandarin's not out here, like, fighting for the supremacy of people that have magic rings they got from a spaceship that know kung fu, or alternatively Chinese supremacy. Like, you don't have Titanium Man or Crimson Dynamo trying to resurrect the USSR or something. You don't have Justin Hammer trying to make it so that everyone has a Hammer brand toaster in their house, or whatever the equivalent there would be. I don't know. You just don't have these things. Spider-Man, like the Green Goblin's not out trying to make more Green Goblins. He's not trying to kill everyone that's not the Green Goblin. Carnage is, but again, Carnage is a psychopath. And it's not a matter of wanting to replace everyone, like, it's just wanting to kill them. And so, you just don't have that with other heroes and villains. And so the X-Men, being mutants, get lumped in with them because, again, most of the villains, period, aren't out there preaching some kind of supremacy like that. I mean, you get, one-offs like the Red Skull, but a lot of his deals are, like espionage type things. Now he gets his hand on the cosmic cube, then he starts going all wacky and the whole like, well, let's institute some of those ideas I had back in Germany in the 30s. Like you have those moments, but they're rare, and that's one guy. Like even the other people you would expect to be like that, like Baron von Strucker or Baron Zemo or Arnim Zola, like they're not like that. They're not out, they're not out there espousing those ideals. Crossbones kind of is, but he's a fanboy of the Red Skull. So it's different with the X-Men, and so this leads to like this weird situation where the X-Men villains should be like basically everyone's villains, and they're trying to kill the X-Men more often than not, and that's just not how the rest of most of Marvel Comics works. But then again, like I said, you have the weird prejudice angle where people don't look at Spider-Man like, oh no, like there's a guy with superpowers, we should be afraid of him. Like they're not, but they also know that there's like a Spider-Man. I mean, the Clone Saga notwithstanding, like he's not the progenitor of some race of spider people. Maybe. The Fantastic Four, it's just the Fantastic Four. Although the Franklin Richards does exist. And is a mutant, in fact. So these people don't represent what the average person in Marvel views as an existential threat, because of the fact that you have people like Magneto out there espousing mutant supremacy and superiority, and then killing a whole bunch of regular people on the regular. Like, people have got this idea now that the mutants, generally speaking, believe that they're the next step in human evolution, and that they're all kind of in on the joke and want to replace regular people. And well, mutants predominantly have mutant children. There's a handful of exceptions to that, but it's basically they have mutant children. And so their numbers are growing, and more of them have greater powers. And on top of that, regular people can have mutant children, and typically their powers manifest sometime during puberty, usually in a blaze of glory when they're in some extreme stressful situation. So your kids are going to school, and you don't know if little Timmy there on the school bus next to him is about to activate his powers, which turn him into a human bomb and is going to take out the whole school bus. And so people are afraid of mutants. They're afraid that their kids are going to be mutants too, because number one, how's that going to look, of course? What did we do wrong? That kind of thoughts. But also, like, at some point, is either the government or the Brotherhood or the X-Men or Apocalypse or the Hellfire Club or somebody going to come knocking like, hey, we're going to be taking your kid to either train, brainwash, or kill or whatever. And so it's a fear because of the reaction to mutants. And a lot of people I see don't grasp that. They're like, well, why aren't they afraid of Spider-Man? And again, it's because there's one. Two if you count the Scarlet Spider, I guess. There's one. And again, Peter Parker isn't like, within the next generation there aren't going to be 10 of him, and then 100, and then 1,000. Like, that's not going to happen. And on top of that, if his kids do have powers, they'll be mutants too, so they'll be lumped in with the other problem. And so you have this, and to some people it just doesn't gel with the rest of Marvel because of the aforementioned whole like, well, but why don't people protest against the Fantastic Four or other powered members of the Avengers or Spider-Man? And it's because they view them as one-offs. They are mutants. They've been mutated, but they're not, in the Marvel term, they're not mutants. They weren't born with their powers. They're one-offs. Even though, again, like, clearly their children will be mutants, because Franklin Richards is a mutant. Spider-Man in the timelines has kids that have powers who basically have to be mutants. So they are actually contributing to what these people perceive as the problem. They just don't understand that. Otherwise, they'd probably be protesting against them too. And that's kind of the thing, is like, these people should be standing up for the mutants. You know, like, the Avengers should be going out and telling people, like, hey, the X-Men are square. Like, they're with us. You know, quit harassing them. They're on our side, and they don't have the same beliefs as people like Magneto. They fight people like Magneto, you know, because they want to coexist. And they don't do that. In fact, that's one of the things people joke about is the worst thing that can happen to a Marvel character is having a guest appearance in an X-Men book, because you're going to be written like a borderline bigot. And that's what happens. You know, like if you read Avengers versus X-Men, I know I hear arguments against this, but objectively, at the beginning of the story, the X-Men are in the right. And the Avengers show up in force to try to abduct one of their members, because supposedly she's going to be the host of the Phoenix Force. And even though the X-Men have exclusively dealt with that up to this point, the Avengers have decided that they're going to stick their nose in everything and not trust the X-Men to deal with this. And Cyclops basically tells them to pound sand. Like, literally, they're on a beach. But, and as the story progresses, the Avengers look worse and worse as the story goes on. But there are people out there that I see that, like, actually defend the Avengers viewpoint, and I totally disagree. But then again, you know, supposedly the Avengers are the good guys there, and as Marvel found out during the Civil War story arc towards the end, they did some polling, and they realized that the vast majority of readers were on Captain America's side ideologically. And they had been writing it under the assumption that Iron Man was the good guy. That's like how he was written, is how they thought the good guy would act in that situation. Which tells you a lot about the people working at Marvel, by the way. To the fact they were floored that, you know, people favored Captain America. And again, it's like, you know, the X-Men have been sitting there for 30 years going through the same thing you're now putting everyone else through. The X-Men's your most popular book. Did you consider that maybe part of that popularity is that the people read it not a big fan of the Registration Act? You know, and so that's why X-Men is just, it's totally different. And so whenever crossovers happen, especially if there hasn't been like build up, it just feels weird that all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, right, the X-Men, they should get in on this shindig. And at no point are the X-Men like, hey guys, so, you know, since we all just saved the universe together, could you go and do some PSAs about how you shouldn't hate every mutant just because they're a mutant? I mean, we're Americans too, for the most part. We're taxpayers, again, for the most part. Like, could you do us a solid here, Cap? You know, maybe? Thor? Iron Man? Anybody? And, like, you know, that conversation has to happen, and then, like, nothing happens. And then the next time the X-Men, like, the government says the X-Men are doing squirrely things, well, here come Iron Man and Captain America to rain on the parade. And it's like, really, guys? And so that's things that just don't feel like they should fit with Marvel. And it's because, well, number one, like, parts of that with the X-Men didn't come until later. And the whole outcast metaphor definitely didn't really get picking up steam until Giant Size X-Men #1 and then Chris Claremont's run. It did not start with Stan Lee, like people think. Like, the Professor X and Magneto are not stand-in for civil rights leaders. That was definitely later on, Stan was like, oh, well, that would have been a good idea, but no. That mostly came from Claremont and then people later on. So it wasn't there from the beginning, and so it's difficult to understand how this comes about, again, especially since there are other heroes. Now, if it was just the X-Men, it would all make perfect sense, because the actions of other heroes very rarely intrude on the X-Men's lives to the point of changing much of anything. And it's usually like the other way around, that like the X-Men, well, it's usually that crossovers don't have any long-lasting effect on anyone involved. But yeah, so that's a problem. And again, like, that's just the X-Men at the base level. That's not even like, hey, let's throw some really wild things in there. You know, then you start getting into other things where it's like, no, I think this would have an entirely different reaction in this book. Like, the other heroes would do different things, like dramatically different. And yeah, so anyway, that's just my bit here about the X-Men. Now, there is a solution to this, in my opinion, because the problem, the big problem is they don't want to come up with original characters. You know, they're like, well, we've got this existing franchise. We'd love to use it as a platform to talk about, you know, whatever the issue is, or you know, we think this would be a good storyline. But the problem is it just wrecks the existing setting, or it just doesn't make sense for that to happen that way. But they do it anyway, and people are just left scratching their heads, and, like, you know, other people cross over with the book, and, you know, like Captain America gets sucked into Avengers versus X-Men, and is written in a way that he just doesn't behave normally. And, you know, other Avengers go along with it. Like, the Thing was talking about, you know, this is going to be fun trashing these muties, and, like, why? Like, where did that come from? And so, yeah, it doesn't gel. And like I said, there is a solution. So if I do a third video, I'm going to talk about it. Because there is a way to have your cake and eat it too here, thanks to the wonders of comic book logic. But we'll save that for part 3, if I get around to it. Hopefully I will. So anyway, that's about all I've got to say about this. Somebody write in the comments what you guys think. Any ideas you see pop up in comics that just don't work because the writers felt that they had to try to shoehorn a very blatant real world issue in, instead of, like, trying to work it in more subtly, and it just doesn't work because the setting just doesn't support that. Anything like that, let me know down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. If you like to hear it here, sharing and commenting help us grow the channel the most. I always appreciate it. And subscribing, obviously, is the metric for growth, so we always appreciate that too. But yeah, that's all I've got today, folks. So I will be seeing you folks later.